All right, what's up, party people? It is Friday, April 5th, and you are live on Shally's Alley. Too bad it's not April 1st. Last year, we had a Shally's Alley episode on April 1st, and we played a pretty big prank on Ryan from Recruiting Daily, where Brian Fink and I announced the big secret that Ryan had left Recruiting Daily and gone to work for SourceCon. And he was getting all these calls and messages, and he's like, "What's going on?" April Fools, buddy. So too bad we don't have an April Fools, but happy April nonetheless. And thank you for joining us live on Shally's Alley. You might notice something about me, something different. Yeah, no, I didn't get a haircut. I am actually hands-free. I no longer have this contraption tied to me, so I can get up and sit down and dance around. I probably won't, but I can. I'm using my studio microphone now. How cool is that? Some time ago, I paid a bunch of money for it, and I never really used it, so I figured, hey, it's time to do it. So welcome today to our special guest and also repeat offender, Patrick Moran. Patrick was on the show, oh my gosh, how long ago was that? Like 3 years ago, we determined?
Yeah, and in like COVID years, that's like 6-7 years ago. So.
I know, decades, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Patrick is a longtime friend, contributor. He's started back in the day at Aerotech, for those of you that may even remember the name Aerotech. They eventually became a lead part of Allegis. But back in the day, Aerotech had a big reputation for having a very strong training program, like from the beginning. And so like they brought people in, and they had this whole curriculum and everything. And then so people usually got a good foundation in recruiting and even sourcing back then. Then he went to go work for the government, and working in the intelligence industry with the clandestine services and the military, working all kinds of secret government missions. And Patrick was one of my go-to people to ask questions about that. As many of you know, I've worked in that space multiple times, but he was there for almost 12 years, I think, right? With BAE?
Yep. 13
and
years.
Then, what's that?
13, yeah.
13, wow. Okay, long time, yeah. So definitely a whole nother universe of sourcing and recruiting with its own challenges and all that. But we're not here to talk about the government. We are here to talk about talent in today's marketplace. And I wanted to ask Patrick some questions about building a sourcing team in the middle of all this, I don't even know what to call it, turmoil or whatever. So Patrick is now at Ford. That's right, the motor company, not the modeling agency. Ford Motor Company, and he's been there a couple of years now building a sourcing team. Patrick, first of all, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. This is always a treat to get to talk to you. So thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah, love the art back there, by the way. That lots of
that is not my art.
Yeah, I know. I'm glad that it's you're showing off kids and family and spouse art. I've been dying to ask you. So, first of all, how awkward is it right now to build a sourcing team in the middle of all this? I don't even know what to call it. Just mess that we're in right now.
It's a scary time, because in one moment you feel great and confident and everything is going well, and then all of a sudden you see a domino fall, and a big company lays off their entire recruitment team, and then another one lays off half the team, and then a Silicon Valley company lays off 5,000 people. And so as a sourcer and a recruiter, you start to salivate and you go, all right, everybody, let's go get their candidates and let's go poach and let's go do all that. You get excited when you see layoffs, but then you start to get that feeling of like, man, this one's falling, that one's falling. Or you watch in automotive, we all look at each other and look at the industry, and we all follow each other. And so you see a headline about this company is offering buyouts, or this company is having a huge layoff, and we all stampede, this is great, there's a layoff at Stellantis, or oh my God, Tesla share price dropped and they're probably going to do some layoffs. Let's go get them. But then you're also in the back of your head thinking, okay, when's it coming for us?
And at the same time, I'm sure there's also hire, like, so that, layoffs over here and hiring over there.
Yes,
And
yes.
that how weird is that, right?
Yeah, the layoffs are almost concurrent with the hiring.
With
And
hiring, yeah. And
it's
then you
just
hear like today, the jobs report came out and it's significantly ahead of expectation. Unemployment is down. But by the way, when I say the jobs report is ahead of expectations, what that means is it's a lot better than they thought it was going to be, but it's still not as good as it was last year. So,
yeah.
we're still behind compared to last year, but we're ahead compared to what we thought we were going to be. And then unemployment's down. So like 3.9 or something like that. So it's just, so you hear about layoffs and then you hear about low unemployment and then you hear about companies that are having a hard time hiring. Oh, we can't find enough candidates. It's so weird. But we can't solve that right now. What I'm dying to know is what has it been like? Like you got there and they were like, build a sourcing team, and you were like, okay, wow. What was the first thing you did?
So, so I'll take you back in my mind. The first thing, I accepted my offer. I'm very excited, and it was on a Friday, and we had a vacation.
That was the first thing, yeah.
Yeah, we had a vacation. I'll take you from moment one, and this is the roller coaster. So this is the ticking up of the roller coaster, and I pretty much went right down within not too long. So accepted the offer on a Friday, and had a vacation plan for Monday. So on Monday, went on the vacation. I'm living high on the hog. Everything's great. I've got this new job, this great job offer. It was part of the great resignation period. I kind of watched most of my long-term higher performing team members go for other opportunities, 4 or 5 years ago. And I eventually said, man, I'm kind of having to rebuild everything here anyway. Maybe it's time after 13 years to poke my head up. So went on that vacation, and that Monday was the day that Ford announced we're going to completely rethink Ford, and we're going to break up the organization and create this new Model E, which is all the electrification. We've got Ford Blue, and then Ford Pro, and all the corporate sort of stuff. So that day, Joe Shanbaum, who hired me, who is an amazing TA professional and a great boss, said, "Hey, Patrick, everything's fine. You're not affected. I'm not affected, but I don't know how long I'll be your boss for, and just buckle up." And this was, I've still
not affected, except for I might not be your boss, which does affect you.
Yeah. So I'm telling my wife, like, I'm sure it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And sure enough, 3-4 months in, Joe and I were meeting often and building out the team and just sort of bouncing ideas off each other, and had big plans. I came from a team that was a very similar size business to Ford in Rex and in business size and revenue. Hey, Joe, I just saw you commented. And so I came from a very similar size and scope of a team, and we had anywhere between 8 to 16 sourcers to fit in with a team of about 30 to 40 or so recruiters. And so I came here with big plans of a multifunctional, high performing, several layers of sourcing support aligned to the business, kind of floating, just in time sort of sourcing, and then a pretty heavy, fill the top of the funnel, true like researcher sourcing type of role. And so we about 3 months in, we had a huge layoff, and about half of the TA team, including Joe, were swept up in that. And so I was, just leaving the runway, ready to fly. And then we were really in a dark moment there a couple of years.
There goes the runway.
Yeah. So we very slowly picked myself off the mat and started to rebuild this team. And we had some large projects that came in, so we brought in some help. And we're still at a very modest team of just 5 sourcers and myself to support a very large business.
Did you hire everybody? And these are people you had to hire, or were there sourcers already there? Oh, okay. So you had to do all that.
I have one FTE that Joe and I talked to. So he's still here. Rob is here, Joe. Now I'm just going to talk to Joe the rest of this interview.
All right.
So Rob's my one FTE, and then we've got some contract sourcers who are an amazing team. I really have a great team. When it's such a small team, it's so critical to hire the right people, because 1 out of 5 if you have a dud for 20% of your team is
Of your
really
team is
hurts.
right. And
Yeah.
then what to do.
So,
So you're
yeah.
going through what I did. A couple years ago, 2000, was it 2001 or 2002, started building a sourcing team from scratch, from the ground up. And so you've been going through that. What what has you what has you? Wow, where is my English? English hard. What has been your biggest headache, your biggest pain in the butt with building the team, just specifically to building the team?
I think, um, every organization, I think TA, because a lot of people in the business think of TA as this is not a revenue generating part of the business,
Right.
right? Even though we are, and even though what we do is fundamental to the people that are actually turning the widgets and
Right.
building the cars and
And
all that.
making the sales and all that, right?
Right. But they think like you're a charge. You're not making us money. So I think the recruiters get fed first traditionally, and then sourcers get the scraps, right? So I think every organization, this is not unique to Ford. I think usually the data people and the finance people get their say and get their whack when you get new systems and new tools and tech stack, and then HR and then TA gets in the fold, and then sourcing is like after everything's already been decided. So
Right.
I think it's always a challenge for sourcers, for sourcing teams to affect the tech stack and to find dollars where you're in a cost cutting environment. I've been in the industry 20 years. I don't ever know if I've ever been in an environment where they said like, we got more budget this year, let's go spend it. It's usually, hey, we got to find 5% somewhere. So the biggest frustration for me, and again, not unique to Ford, is I would always like more team members. I'd always like more time. I've got all the ideas. I've got the playbook. I've got every little button we could push from a sourcing standpoint. But with a modest, 5 members on my team, it's tough to spread all the sourcing love around and do every single thing I'd like to do.
Okay.
So the real challenge for me is that creativity exercise, and that just thinking like, we want to do a robust competitive intel strategy. We want to do robust layoff outreach. We want to do diversity sourcing. We want to do every single evergreen skill set. We want to knock down the hot recs. We want to knock down the aging recs. We need to support all the high volume projects. We need to
Critical,
support
yeah,
all the
critical,
critical, like
emergency,
high priority stuff,
confidential.
and do that with 5 people supporting 1,200 active recs and like 40 recruiters. So it's
And find
very
diversity
daunting.
candidates and executives in other countries.
Yes, yeah. We're mostly US based, but it's tech, it's technical sourcing. These aren't like, so we have a manufacturing side of the house that does their own thing, and then our roles are all technical and engineering. So
Got
they're
it.
not easy candidates to reel in either.
So let's dive into this a little bit. There's lots of different ways. There's organizational design theory around how to build, robust teams, how to build teams that are remote. You've got all these different theories and practices about building teams. But in sourcing, we have a particular challenge that is about alignment. Yeah, you don't usually have a debate or difficulty aligning your resources in an organization because it's typically done by whatever the, either functional or the silo or the, but in sourcing we tend to run into this frequently. How did you, if whatever you can share that's not proprietary, how did you decide to align your team? Is it based on verticals? Is it based on geography? Is it based on department or channels or skill set? What was the determination?
So another great thing about accepting my job offer and then walking into a completely rethinking itself company is that the alignment continues and realignments to this
Mhm.
day. So every time it's like the Charlie Brown thing. Every time we think we've aligned our TA teams and I'm ready to
Somebody
go
moves the
align a
ball.
sourcer, we shuffle the deck.
But
So
let's just say, generally speaking, maybe not necessarily exactly right now, but generally speaking, is the philosophy one of um, aligning based on function or territory or
I
channel?
don't think, yeah, I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. I think it depends on your business, on what you go after, what your evergreen skill sets are, what your sourcing methodology is. If it's a researcher top of the funnel, then
Mhm.
maybe you're just picking skill sets and you're saying you go get these 20 skill sets, you go get those 20, you go get those 20. Um, where it becomes a real challenge and a resource exercise is I've got four main customer groups and five people. Um, and a lot of the customer groups bleed into each other, and a lot of the skill sets, even on the manufacturing side to our engineering side, a lot of that vehicle engineering, vehicle manufacturing stuff is very similar. So I definitely can't claim that we're perfect at it. But we're trying to do two things at once. We're aligning sourcers to certain business verticals that have a lot of the same sort of skill sets, so they can have those deep pipelines, because you need that. You need that alignment. I think that's always the most important thing, is that sourcer, those recruiters that go to that sourcer, feel comfortable, know that person, knows the business, and there's just a much quicker. Um,
So it's
they're not,
industry expertise. You're aligning sources based
yeah,
on their industry knowledge
their
to
their
some degree.
pipelines are deeper, and their pipelines can
Okay.
snap to quicker. They understand the recs quicker. You don't have to keep going through an exercise of discovering the call, the rec parameters over and over. I've kind of kept it aligned to that extent. And then the evergreen stuff is where it's a real challenge. We're trying to do more of that currently, and that's where I've been trying to find sort of lower hanging fruit, things that we can just weave into our day, that are more proactive in nature. Um, and also having a team that is connected with each other, can share resumes quickly, and because you always have that fear when you do align people, is okay, you've got a developer here, you've got a developer there, developer there. So
Just no sharing. Yeah.
yeah.
So aside from the industry dimension, is there another dimension that you could use um, to resource the team? I mean, some
Yeah.
companies it's territorial, and that's kind of an easy one, but that's not always possible, especially if you don't have enough resources for the territory. But you can align, West Coast versus East Coast, however, and that's fairly straightforward. So
Yeah.
if you don't have the ability to do that, then what's the next dimension that you would use? Is it based on channel or based on um, the sourcer's particular skill set?
That's the way I've always fought rigidity, fought an alignment in anything I do, usually because I'm having to work
Yeah,
with limited resources, and sort of spread it around and move resources. So a lot of times, and when we started here at Ford and I had the five, we kept it almost like agency, where it's like, throw us a rec, I'll approve it, sign off, we'll assign a sourcer. And as they start going, you start realizing this one's great at development, or this person lives in Palo Alto, they know the lingo, they know all the players, go get it. Or this
yep.
person came to us from Rivian, and
You
they,
adapt. Yep.
um, so I think they naturally find their own alignments, or you pair a recruiter and a sourcer, and they just have a great rapport. Things go well. They get it. They're like an active user, and so you just chase that as far as it'll go. I like to kind of set people in motion on things they like. I think if you're working something, being voluntold, or doing something that doesn't jive with what excites you, or you can't quite talk to the technology piece, or you can't just quite get into um, the meat of the recs, I think that makes it a challenge. So I try to find people, whether it's hiring people with a certain pedigree or a certain background, or just a certain personality type to match with the business. I try to find those alignments, let them find themselves normally, and rarely, I think that works well, so long as you have the right amount of people, and the people in the right places.
Got
Um,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So my philosophy. We've talked about this before, and I share my structure on the sourcing pods, and I definitely feel like that adaptability is absolutely critical for sourcing because of the changes that we the restrictions that we face, and budget and all that. So it's always been my philosophy to make sourcing teams rapidly deployable and fully ad hoc. So you've got to find a way to prioritize incoming recs, got to find a way to organize and strategize what you're going to do, so you have a plan and you have workflows. But whenever people ask me how should I align them by by function or by department, or pair them up with a recruiter, I always say it's really not. I think you should just create a pod of 2 or 3 or 4 sourcers that work together, and let them figure out what's best for them as a pod. And interestingly enough, I've been talking about this for probably at least 15 years, if not more than that. And it came from, as I'm sure you know, the intelligence services, because that's how they organize their desks. As far as like the way intelligence is collected throughout the world, you obviously can't have all of the world's intel reporting into one person, right? But it actually does come out to be like the president of the United States, POTUS, gets a 7:15 a.m. intel briefing every day, and it is the world's intelligence rolled up into one person. So how do they do that? Well, they do that by dividing things up into essentially these pods, where they have specialists in each country that report to a desk. That country desk reports to the region reports to the hemisphere, and so on. So I borrowed from that, and I borrowed from just-in-time inventory and just-in-time manufacturing, and came out with this structure. Well, lo and behold, a couple of years back, probably 7 years or so, I was attending this lecture from this general that in the military that had created a concept called teams of teams, where basically he was saying in order to operate in a world where you sometimes don't have any communication with your troops, and where you have to make split decisions without that communication, they split up into these teams that essentially line up exactly with the pods that I was talking about for years. So I was like, oh yeah, you're vindicated, right? And the way that he talks about it, it's a book you can find on Amazon called Teams of Teams, or Team of Teams. Basically, he's like, you need a small squad that, or pod in our case here, that can move or adjust with what's happening on the ground and operate within the broader parameters. So you have broader parameters that are like, all right, here's what we want you to do. What you actually do day by day may vary as long as it aligns with the override. And you might respond to, like you said, so-and-so's having a layoff. All right, well, we're going to switch over and do some layoff sourcing right now, because for the next 4 hours, we have a competitive advantage. So things like that. So I'm glad to hear that that's alive and well. And if anybody's interested, check out that Team of Teams. I want to dig a little bit deeper on something that you said, which is finding people, specifically finding sourcers. It wasn't that long ago where, when I was starting to build my sourcing team at my prior engagement, it was really hard to find sourcers. I contacted everybody that I knew. I think I even called you up. And I'm like, do you know anyone? Do you know anyone? Nobody was looking. Everybody was engaged. The skyrocketing prices, and it was really hard to find anybody that can source. And then now it's the other way around. There's a lot of people looking, but it's really hard to, how do I say this without being offensive? Oh, whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm not trying to be offensive, but you kind of have to separate the wheat from the chaff. You got a lot of applicants. I posted a job for a sourcer, and I got 2,000 applicants overnight. So what are you doing to determine which one's actually really good?
Yeah. So I personally look to the personality fit. I treat my interviews. I don't do a super technical like whiteboard. I don't do a ton of, here's a scenario, give me a behavioral, example. I think people are trained on those, right? Yeah. So I ask all the questions, and I go through all the usual sort of stuff. But what I'm listening for is kind can I work with this person? Do I jive with this person? If we're in that foxhole and we get thrown in that pod to do this huge skunkworks project that
Yeah.
is super demanding and super tough, am I going to be able to trust that person? So, um, it's hard to define, and it's definitely not in the job description. But I think, I listen for the answers. I listen for all the usual stuff. I want someone that is passionate about what they do, um, honest, accountable, detail oriented, self motivated. Um, so I'm looking for a lot, and a lot of it is softer skills. The sourcing thing, I think, if you can recruit, if you can source on anything, I had an employee in my last role in the defense and intelligence community that came. Her last role before that was at Tyson's, the chicken farming company. So she was hiring chicken farmers and chicken farm workers, and was a great sourcer at sourcing intel community. So, and it was because of her personality. It was because of her type A, go-getter sort of mentality. So I'm really looking for the qualities of a person, and some of the questions are,
Soft skill
yeah,
alignment. Okay.
and I think I listen for certain things. I listen for, like, because you get a lot of recruiters that will interview as sourcers, or you get a lot of recruiter
Yeah.
candidates that are maybe making that transition, which I've hired, and they do well as well. But I want to know, like, what motivates you about recruiting? What do you like best? If it's, I love, the customer interaction. I love finding someone a job. I love the touchy feely. Like, I'm happy about making people happy. That's fine, and that's a good answer. Some people answer like, I just can't get off a search once I get on it. I'm so, like, driven to just find that unfindable person. That's like, okay, there's an aha
Right.
moment in an interview. Um,
So
I
that's a
listen for,
kind of
like,
I don't know, a core, an aptitude or um, core strength, right? It's just
yeah,
how they operate.
it's not a Boolean. It's not these list of tools. And I'll listen for, like, a methodical, some sort of methodology to how they source. And even some that maybe it's not that impressive of a list of tools or a list of places, but
But
they
how they
just have that
how they
mentality.
thought
They
about
have
it,
that
right?
inquisitive nature. They have that, that self-motivated thing. So I think those are the folks that have worked best for me, regardless of the technical answers to questions they had. Was that personality fit?
Okay.
Yeah.
So once you make a decision and you've got somebody starting on your team, you're building on a team. Do you have a formal I don't know, onboarding curriculum or structure for specifically for sourcing? Not about like onboarding to the company. Of course, you have that. It's company onboarding, but I mean onboarding into sourcing, right? Do you have like a list of things that like what do you have them do in the first couple of weeks?
Yeah. It's not a robust program like that. I usually hire folks that come with a point of view, are mid-level to senior professionals. A lot of them are, 20 years plus in industry. So I've never seen my sourcing teams as, like, we take a recruiting coordinator. Used to be, right? 20 years ago, it was like your recruiting coordinators, or the recruiter that couldn't do the salesy part of the job, was the sourcer. And then they someday graduated to hopefully be a recruiter. I think we've gone way past those days, and it's a specialty. So, um, I try to hire folks that are pretty self-sufficient, and know what they, know their stuff. So I don't really feel that burning need to do that. That said, right now we are revamping our sourcing methodology documentation to say, this is our Bible, our source of truth. This is step 1, 2, 3, 4, 100 of the places you can go. Similarly, on the customer side of things, we're providing them with a menu, a dashboard to say, if you want sourcing
Okay,
support, you might have thought it was just Recruiter Lite, or you might have thought it was just
right.
top of funnel, or you might have thought some crazy, God knows what they think we are at this point. It's funny when you ask people, you tell them you're a sourcer, they have no clue, right? And
Yeah,
even people that interact with sourcers half the time don't know what we do. So, um, I don't have a real rigorous onboarding and training program, because I usually hire folks that are pretty senior. But
right,
and
right.
I also that creative part of me that I want people to do things in the way that they like to do it best. I like to
Okay.
have as few parameters and guardrails
You have
as
you have workflows. You have like do
yeah.
this and that, but as long as you
It's a
can,
very minimum, like a
as long as you know
submittal
how to do
should
this
have
and that, everything else you've got liberty to be creative.
yeah, the marketing will talk about, and I'm always open. That's the thing too, is like I'm not a finished product. I don't know everything about recruiting sourcing. It changes constantly. The market changes, people's ideas change to that novelty of you get a new person. That's the great part about diversity is that diversity of thought, background,
Mhm.
how
Right,
you look at candidates, how you reach out to candidates. I want a diverse team. I want a diverse thinking team. And that way I can plug them in ways that their
right.
diversity helps
Yeah,
us.
well said. Absolutely. Yeah, I have I have an outline of things that I cover. I'm not going to say it's rigid. It's just well documented. That talks about the workflow, right? So here's what I'm expecting the outcomes to be, and then everything else in between is you're you can run your desk the way you want to, but there are gates that they have to cross. So there are things that I do teach them how to do. We have a question from actually two now. One of them from Ben Weber wants to know, how are you structuring research teams versus just in time? It sounds like your answer is that they both do, the team members do both.
Yeah.
But he goes on to ask, what does success look like for you in this and how's it measured? So let's take the research side because the other side is a little bit easier, even though a lot of people answer it differently. But with research only, or as you said, competitive intel, how is success measured?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And if you know the answer or know someone who does, let me know. Um, I think it's obviously so much more qualitative than quantitative. And I think it's the storytelling. So it is, we had this big project, we put this researcher there, and you can give some high level facts and figures, but I think telling the story of they went here, they went there, they found this many leads here, this many there. You're never going to stand on your hires or even your offers or even your interviews for someone that's a researcher, right? So I think it's more those exciting moments for people that aren't into sourcing or don't quite know exactly what goes into what we do to say, well, they did this type of search and they
Mhm.
did that. Methods that people, the layperson would have no clue a sorcerer is capable of and can do.
Right.
So I think it's doing the storytelling. You can have some great numbers to throw on a spreadsheet, but it's not going to be like a traditional funnel at all. You're
Not
going
for
to have to
research,
get
no.
comfortable
So
with
the
the fact.
storytelling, like what is the point of the story? I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. It's that we went the places your recruiters didn't have the time to, or the resources, or the
Ah,
know-how,
got it.
and we found stuff. And whether the stuff was diamonds or whether the 10,000 people
Like
came
with
out to
research,
100
you'll
hires,
go, you
so
don't know
many
what you're
things.
going to find, but you know you're going to find something.
Yeah,
So
and so
okay,
many things can happen on the way to I sourced a bunch of candidates to they got hired that are way out of a researcher's control.
right.
You have to really value the process they took and what came out of it. You couldn't do an amazing bunch of process and have nothing to come out of it. So you have to
Right.
have some wins. You have to go, okay, we got this data. And I think a part of the researching should be enriching the data. It's not just I
That's
pulled
right.
100,000 leads off of the dark web or something and just good luck, go run with it. Like I can't do anything with that. A business leader can't do anything with that. You got to be able to get it, enrich it, and actually in some
And
cases
make
I
it
think
actionable.
still
Yeah.
reach out to the people, campaign. You can't just give me, I've hired researcher sourcers that were true researchers and that's all they could do. And they just give you this like 5 terabyte file of gobbledygook. And you're like, well, this was great. This took you 6 months and I'm out $100,000. Like I need to actually be able to do something with it. So I think that's the
That's a very good
storytelling.
point. So yeah, I would jump on that and say that I think the difference between the just-in-time sourcing against Rex, where you clearly have candidates in the pipeline and you can measure however you want to measure. But one of the things that I would look for in answering Laura's question here is measuring the success of the sourcers. I think that the most important metric to look at with just-in-time is the percentage of candidates that make it to whatever the first interview is, which could be a phone screen with the hiring manager, it could be a text screen, it could be an online questionnaire, whatever that first step is. But they pass application review and they move forward. So to me, it's the percentage of those that do versus don't, and the number of those that do compared to previous comparable periods. So that to me is the number one metric. But for research, it gets a lot more difficult. Like we have someone asking about market mapping. Oh, that's Joe. There we go. In the pure, list generation that you talked about, I think there not only is the enrichment important, but when you're looking at how to measure success, and this is your job as the manager, the team leader, is to be able to make it actionable. So whatever the numbers are, whatever the data is, it has to, like you were saying, tell a story, but tell a story that is an actionable story.
Right.
Whatever that recommendation is, we should do this or we should do that, or and it's the difference between information and wisdom. It's the difference between analysis and visualization, right? And that's it's a challenging thing to do, because in order for you to visualize or represent that research, you've got to do it in such a way that the audience is going to understand it. You might have a really good way of telling the story of what the research outcome was, but that might not be a story that the audience understands. So
Right.
Part of it is synthesizing it into a story. Part of it is figuring out a way to make that be a recommendation. And then the other part of it, let's say it's a third, and a third, is making it, visualizing it or representing it in a way that the audience, whether it's hiring managers or executive leadership, wants to see it, or not, maybe not wants to see it, but can understand it, right?
Yeah.
Like, for example, we did all this research, blah, blah, blah. The outcome was we now have a comprehensive list of every competitor, where they're located, their websites, their direct access, phone numbers, number of employees, types of roles, et cetera. So we have a market map to answer the other question here about market mapping. We have a market map, and we now are able to pinpoint target companies. Well, who cares? What's the point of that? Well, the point of that is that next time we get a weird rec for something that we don't do very frequently, we can go into our market map and pinpoint the names of 5 target companies. And you know as well as I do that when you go out and you source for people from particular target companies, the results are faster and more accurate. Because if those are the companies that do the things that you need done, they don't need to be competitors, right? In the intelligence industry, they're frequently not going to be competitors, right? Yeah. But as long as they're companies that hire the same people that you need to hire, then they can be a good target. So now your outcome is the story of, we are able to go to market faster because we have this map. So to me, that's kind of the measure. And then the other question is, for you, how are you measuring success now? In other words, like, I shared my point of view on the just-in-time and the research, but what is success for a large manufacturing company?
Yeah, it's very similar for me. While I'd like to know the full funnel, from how many leads you looked at, to contacted, to screened, to submitted, interviewed, offered, and hired, I really think right around, you want to make sure, everyone's seen that recruiter that submits a million candidates and throws crap against the wall and nothing sticks, and they're just sort of doing this pantomime. And then you've got folks that are like a sniper, and they send one candidate, you really trust it, and that's the one that gets hired, and they're 1 for 1. So I think you can have all the eye-popping numbers on the front of the top of the funnel, or you could be doing well at the end of the funnel, but you could be doing well at the end of the funnel because you had a dialed in consultative recruiter that was taking your submittals, selling them to the hiring manager, really working the hiring manager and getting those offers through and really knowing the market. Or you could have a dud recruiter, and you could do all this great sourcing work, you could send them over and they sit on it for a week or 2 weeks, or they haven't really fully qualified the rec, or they're giving you
What if
bad
you
info.
have what if you have the outcome that you want? What if you have the hires that you want, but they're the ones that are the kind of recruiter that's doing the throw paper at the wall. So
Right.
they're
It's
doing
going to
that, but they still get the outcome. How do you?
You're ruining your brand if you do that, right? Because if
Okay,
I'm reaching
so
out
you're
to
measuring
100
that as well.
candidates, yeah, I reach out to 100, I hear back from 60, I submit all 60, and 2 get hired. There's
Yeah.
58, upset people, especially when it comes to, if you're dealing in volume, higher volume than you can manage. You're not giving people that personal touch. You're not giving them timely feedback. You're not giving them, a good feeling and a good customer experience. So
That's the
I
problem
think,
I have with using higher numbers hires as a metric for sourcing.
yeah,
I get
yeah,
asked this question
yeah.
so much, and I am blue in the face from pounding my fist on the desk saying, no, do not measure sourcers by number of hires.
Yeah.
That is a department metric. That is the metric that you use as a manager to measure whether or not you're being successful in TA. But even that number by itself is absolutely pointless, because the measure that you really want as a leader is what percentage of recs are filled. It's the staffing rate. It's really not the number of hires, because if I told you 12 hires, that means nothing. If I
Right.
said 12 hires out of 12 openings, that's different. But if I said 12 hires and I said out of 100, then you'd be like, oh, that's not very good, right? So
Right.
12 out
Or
of 12.
12 easy recs versus one
Exactly.
impossible rec.
So that number of hires is a terrible measure, even more terrible for sourcers. But I think for sourcers, there are, like I said, first of all, the number of people who actually make it to interview, and the percentage that convert. And also, no matter what you look at, you want to also compare that to time. So you want to have improvement, which is what really a metric is. Otherwise, it's not a metric, it's a measure. A point in time is a measure. A point in time over time, or the same point over time, is a metric. So let's stick to that. And I would say beyond that, you can use for both situations the research and the just in time, as Ben was saying. You can use the quality measures that you were talking about before. So now, whether the sourcer is to the recruiter, the sourcer is to the hiring manager, whether it's the sourcer's response rate, these are all ways to look at the quality of, are you sourcing too many? If you source 100,000 and only get 20 responses, well, that's not good quality, right? So you want to look at the quality in the different steps as an aggregate. We had a question on what about market mapping? How would you go about doing the market mapping? What tools do you suggest? So you're doing some of this right now.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any tools that you can point to without becoming an advertorial for market mapping?
Well, this won't be, because I've never had a huge tools budget for stuff like this. This is a
Fair enough.
luxury.
So how are you doing it? The question is,
Yeah.
how are you doing it? Yeah.
So on the paid side, any of those business intelligence tools are no brainer, easy ones. Zoom Info and HubSpot, all the different sales sort of tools. I think also, like, some of those market mapping ones, whether it's LinkedIn Insights or Lightcast, or some of the CRMs now are giving this sort of data too. So if you have paid tools that you can access, great. Otherwise, I think it's AI is coming into the picture now, where you can ask AI what the top companies are in a certain skill set, and then ask a new prompt and another prompt, so you can go down there. Now, I've tried that to say, give me a list of the top 100 battery electric vehicle manufacturers, and it'll give you 10. And then you say, well, give me all of them. And then you'll get in an argument with the AI, and it'll say, well, I'm not really going to give you that many. So they've put guardrails around how much they'll give you. And I've tested that ground.
Right. Yeah, there's ways to do it, but
I think
some AIs are better than others at that. But yeah, so AI is, AI or generative AI, large language models, is one. Essentially searches, right? Going on Google and trying to find lists of companies that have already been put together. Okay.
Yeah. I think for me, it's always, a lot of what I do has been, on a budget, everywhere I've been. And so a lot of it is Google search.
You're all alone there, man.
Yeah, really,
Nobody
really.
else. Yeah.
It's a Google search. It's okay,
Yeah.
electrification or what have you, and you'd be shocked at what you get. Or if you throw in a file type, or you throw in some keywords around speakers or professional organizations, you
Yep.
start to go to, oh, here's a
Conferences.
certifying
Right.
authority for battery modules or something, and then all of a sudden you've got a list of
The companies that what
they're
certification
there, the
because
sponsors,
right.
the attendees. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think like just doing that, I call it pulling the thread. Like you get one little breadcrumb, it brings you to the next. You go down the dead end. Okay, no, we're gonna tweak the search. So that's what I love is like writing a search, tweaking the search 100 times until you found every little possible honey hole of data and
Yeah.
information.
Well, I know myself. I said not to turn into an advertorial, but since the question was asked, two paid tools that I can point to that are relatively, they're not super expensive, like some of the ones that you mentioned. LinkedIn Analytics, for example, is prohibitively expensive in my opinion. But two that I would recommend. The first one is it's called Talent View it's a company. Let me see if I can pull up the web page and put that up on the chat here. Public Insights is the name of the company. So the website, so the product is Talent View, but the website is Public Insight, singular, publicinsight.io. And that Talent View is a very deep source of information that includes market movements, it includes demographics, it includes resumes, what do resumes look like now, the shift in geographic locations, and also things like some sentiment analysis, from a variety of not just Glassdoor, but a variety of places. So Talent View is a really robust tool. And the other one would be Claro Analytics, which I think is one of the ones you were mentioning about the RPO or so Claro has an on-demand product. And so, Public Insights Talent View is a subscription and it's got very deep data, including real-time compensation. Claro is a subscription based and it has a different kind of data that's a little bit more around the, I would say it revolves around instant access to reporting that you could use to visualize to your leadership, right? Like talent supply and talent demand, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff. It
Yeah.
reminds me a little bit of like that. I don't know if Indeed still does this, but Indeed used to have that talent supply report. They probably don't do that as much anymore, but it used to be only for a particular job. Like you do have to have a job function.
Yeah.
Claro, you can do that for diversity, Asian, Black, Latinx, and you can do it for geography, education. So it's like a talent demand map, which is
Yeah.
pretty neat. So those are two tools that I would point people to.
I think AI is changing those companies too for the better. I think it's making it way easier for them to
To
scrape,
analyze
get all
it.
the data, and then to analyze and visualize. I think like that's where AI is. I'm not a big fan of like the matching technology or the AI is going to spit out a list of candidates. I still think
Yeah.
my sourcers can do that way better. But I think like data analytics, high
Yeah.
level stuff. And I do also want to throw in an endorsement for your sourcer screens, your recruiter screens. Well, it's great. And you can give a directional slide deck that'll say, these are the top 20 competitors. These are the schools. This is the market. This is what we think about salary. And it's very impressive. I think it's like Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? So you can have this great plan, but once you start talking to the market, that's when you're really going to find out. And I think we grew up in an age where the data was very slow. The salary insights were slow. It was based on government, census data or what have you. The skill sets were not specific. Now with AI and with scraping technology and all that, we can get much more timely, much more accurate, scraping of job postings, scraping of resumes and things like that. So I think
Yeah,
the
it's what
tools are much better.
these models are really good at that. They're good at processing large volumes. That's what they are, large language models. So large volumes of information, and if it's homogeneous information, it can determine some patterns. In fact, that's to me, it's one of the gaps that I see in the ChatGPT model where like they're giving you some of these things for free. Gemini does this as well, but you can't really upload like a spreadsheet and say, tell me something about,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
still just text. Like I'd love to be able to give it actual tables of data. You can do this if you pay the premium, but give it like tables of data and say, what are the top job titles here? That kind of thing.
yeah.
We have a question about campaigns. What are you doing around the relationship building follow? This is for you and I. Our language. This would be like the keeping them warm, right? The um, pipelining side of right. So as opposed to you've got a rec, you got a candidate that applies for a rec. This is more like what are you doing to keep people interested over time so that they can be engaged when ready? Is that do you have a plan for that? Do you have a tool for that? What is the way to address that need?
That's a good one. I think the tools can sometimes be lacking. It's your tech stack is important in how you slice and dice your candidates and
Right.
your
Like ATSs aren't really good at pipelining or keeping warm, right? That's more of a CRM thing.
God, again, I sound like a broken record here, but with limited budgets throughout my career, I have become deadly with Microsoft Office Suite, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and it's simple and
Did you ever use that spreadsheet that I published?
I'm not sure. I don't know which one you're referring to.
Yeah. So it's let me put it in the chat. You might have. It's at srcn.co/MC, and it is a Google sheet. It's a spreadsheet, but it's a Google sheet, and it has different tabs. One of the tabs is the contacts, right? First name, last name, email, and it also has some built-in reporting. And it's basically if you don't have any money, but you can afford Google, which I mean it's free, you can use this as an ad hoc CRM with the stages that are built in so that like, all right, they got email one, they got email two, and that addresses the question. It's a little bit harder to track large data sets. If you have 100,000 people with a Google sheet, it gets really hard. So, once you get to a certain size, you want a CRM. But like you said, if you don't have any money and you can use Google Sheets, by the way, this also can be saved as a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet. So either way, so that's something that you could do. Do you have something similar? And do you divide up like Shally does email and Patrick does calling, or does Shally do email and calling for one team? Like how is the
Yeah.
nurturing separated out?
It is one sourcer owning. It's again, they're working in a certain vertical
They're
and they're
okay.
keeping, yeah. And you came out of this defense and intelligence community where everybody is not only really tough to find technical skill sets, often as the U.S. government likes to do in the most wacky out there places in the country that nobody lives, nobody has, no schools, no stores, one restaurant, one stoplight town, and there's like a 10,000 person data center there. So and they have to
How
have
many
that
people top
security.
secret clearance in
Yes,
like
with a
town
top
with
secret and this and that,
500
and
people,
a
right?
bunch of caveats. So, it's a very small community, and you really have to have
Nurturing.
your nurturing, your pipeline organized. You have to have a good way of remembering who is what, where they fit in, what the clearances are.
So they're using something like a
And a lot of it
spreadsheet.
comes down to luck. And so that's where you have to have that um, rigorous way to keep yourself organized, whether it is a spreadsheet,
Yeah.
whether it is, you got to make sure the time factor is a huge piece of it. So
Tell me
here's when I
about that.
reached
So,
out.
what is the time factor? Like, reach out every 3 months, reach out every 9 months, right? Or does it vary?
Yeah, I think it varies on the skill set. I think it varies on the person. You're going to get feedback from them that, that they don't want to hear from you. And I'm used to doing it one at a time, one by one,
Okay.
methodically, because we would usually do the purple squirrel sort of stuff. But of course, every company now has some sort of, campaigning technology where you put people in a certain bucket, however you want to define it, if it's skill set, if it's from an event, and then you can just turn on that drip campaign. And yeah, I think quarterly doesn't sound so bad. You don't want to do it way too much. If you don't have anything worth saying, also, don't just send an
Right.
email, because
Or
then
just
you're,
fake an update just for the
yeah,
sake of it. Yeah, it's got to be
you want to have
something.
you want to have a point of view, you need to have a team and a organization that has the time to be able to put together a meaningful something
Well, I
to
think that's what
attract.
Ben was asking is how do you do that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think if you have one person that can create some content, in advance, like maybe a few posts that can be updated with news, then everybody can use that. But if not, then you've got to have a little bit of everyone has to have their list of people that they keep in touch with, or you do it the old fashioned way,
Yeah.
Rolodex style with the new Rolodex being LinkedIn or whatever, you know,
We've got a content library where we have approved, marketing,
things that,
approved
right.
stuff, imagery, and blurbs, things like that. So if it's one recruiter at a time, one sourcer at a time, if you're working in an environment like that, it's organize your people well, organize the time you spoke to them and the time you want to frequently reach out to them, and just be really good at that. If you start like losing track and your spreadsheet's ugly and it's not
Yeah, it's,
working, it's crashing, that's not going to work. So
so they have to organize themselves the way that, unless you
yeah,
provide
unless
them
you
with
have a great
right.
CRM or great tool. Yeah.
Unless you have that, they have to kind of organize. But the last question I want to ask about this for Ben, as a follow up, is how do you ensure that this is consistent, whatever the frequency is? Because one of the easiest things to do is to forget about your nurturing campaigns, you know?
Yeah.
So, how do you keep that? How do you, I guess, motivate them or ensure that they keep up with it? Because it's important, but not urgent. You know how that goes.
Right, right. I think hopefully you have a technology or a methodology that allows you to say, all right, I know this is going to take 4 hours, but we're going to come up with this once a month, or it's going to take a day, but we're only doing it once a quarter. So you got to schedule it in. If you're not rigorous
Mandate
about
and
your
schedule, okay.
schedule, whether it's your work week
As the
as a
manager,
recruiter
you say, all
sourcer,
right, we're going to do this
yeah.
outreach. Right. Okay.
But what happens a lot of time too is you can get, you can schedule yourself to you're blue in the face for the next 3 years, and then all of a sudden something industry changing happens,
Well,
or
yeah, you
company
gotta have room for
changing, and then you got to go in different directions. So
you gotta have
I
room for
think
that.
as much as you can, plan out as far as you can, and be rigorous about this is going to be a standing thing. And then, if you have to drop it or change, times change, sentiments change. So you have
Right.
to build in that flexibility too.
Right. Right. But I think we gave a good answer to Ben for that. Well, fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I kept you a little bit past. It usually happens when I lose track of time and have fun with my friends and good conversations. But thank you for spending some time with us on a Friday. Your time is very valuable. I appreciate that. And to our listeners, thank you for listening in. Hopefully, you found some good benefit in this conversation. You're a second time visitor, so I'm not going to ask you who should be on our show next, unless you have a recommendation for that. But I do want to ask you for the last thought. Folks sometimes tune in and watch the recording, and I want them to have something to take away that is a thought provoking idea. What would you like people to think about for themselves over the next few days?
For me, it's always been, I think AI is such a big buzzword and is so helpful in so many ways, and is really coming for all of us. Um, but I think the thing that AI cannot right now, and it will be able to, I think, eventually, but can't take your creativity away. It can definitely take your work ethic. It can definitely take your analytical mind away, but that creative component, and it is getting better minute by minute, right? But I got about 20 years left in this career if I'm lucky, and I'm just hoping I can ride this AI wave right out and say, and it's going to be on my creativity. So that's always been my special sauce as a sourcer, is how I think, how I, game plan, how I try to solve a problem. So if you can do that well, I think that's the secret sauce in every industry. Forget recruiting or sourcing. Is if you're a creative thinker, if you can think on your feet and think in all sorts of different ways and think about human beings, the personas, motivations, robots aren't that good at that yet.
Right.
So I think
So the
if you can
question
do that,
is, how are you using this to be creative?
right, it's helping us. It's in it almost everything we do now. Whether we know it or not, there's AI behind most of what's happening in the world technically, but I think your creativity will serve you well for
Well
hopefully
said.
at least another 20 years for those of us
Well
in
said.
my
Yeah.
corner.
Love that. Great way to close the show. So thanks a lot, Patrick, for that. And with that, guys, it is the end of our Friday's Shally's Alley. Tune in next week. We are going to have John Kelly on April 12th. And as usual, be kind to yourselves. Bye-bye, everybody.